Today we will talk about trade wars, about friends, enemies, allies, and how trade wars affect us. And we will also talk, or rather, start with the revival of Argentina. 100 years ago, Argentina, having adopted a copy of the American Constitution, surged ahead and became the 8th most productive country in the world. The standard of living almost reached the level of the United States of America, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom, and then the people who were living 100 times better than before. But they envied those who were richer, more enterprising, and successful, and started voting for redistribution to take away and divide. And the country plunged into real socialism, where only those who lived well before continued to live well. Behind fences, officials and members of the ruling party and no one else. Everyone else practically lived below the poverty line.
Argentina declared a default on its government debt totaling $132 billion. It was the largest government default in history, and it marked the beginning of the Great Depression in Argentina. It also led to political turmoil. In 2 weeks, the country had 5 different presidents, and in 2002, the new president, Eduardo Duhalde, finally abandoned the peso's peg to the dollar. In the long run, this would make the economy much more stable, but the immediate consequences were far from optimistic. Argentinians effectively lost 65% of their savings due to the sharp drop of the peso. In addition, the fall of the peso caused massive inflation, as imports became much more expensive. The cumulative inflation during the Great Depression in Argentina was about 80%. Combined with the loss of savings, this led to a sharp decline in the standard of living.
Have you already seen the picture? Take away and distribute, and don't forget about yourself. Always and everywhere, it led to poverty and dictatorship, either a junta or the mob. In Argentina, just like in Venezuela today, about 60% of the population was what you would call beyond poverty, basically destitute. They didn't have enough food to feed their children in the evening, not enough electricity to heat their homes, and no way to start earning a living. And this happened to one of the most developed and richest countries in the world. The olives still sing hymns and praises to General Perón, his wife, who was not of very heavy behavior and not very great intelligence. After the Perons, there was Kirchner, who nationalized the economy. Ucha remained, and after a brief rise, the fall was even more terrible and painful.
With his left-wing populist ideology, called Kirchnerism, and inspired by the former Argentine leader Perón, this president sought to centralize control over the economy. He nationalized various companies, imposed price controls, and set high taxes on imports and exports. Over time, this slowed down economic growth and innovation. The government's money printing also led to inflation rising above 20%. When Kirchner's wife, Cristina Fernandez, became president in 2007, inflation got even more out of control due to money printing and government debt.
Kirchner. Following a familiar tradition, the woman who took over from her husband believed that if you print a lot of money and give it to people, then people will have money. She decided that everyone who lived before her were simply idiots and never thought of such a simple way to provide the population with everything they needed. By the way, she did exactly the same thing that Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the sly guy Mendami, who pretends to be naive and wants to save the world from poverty, are proposing.
Later, the consequences of poor government financial management became apparent when the country defaulted on its debts in 2014.
That is 100 years of nightmare. 100 years. 4 generations, ladies and gentlemen. Argentinians voted for the sweet promises of the socialists who didn't even change their promises. Why change them if they work? The foolish people shouted, "Hooray," completely forgetting what was happening to them. In fact, it is happening because of the fulfillment of those very promises for which they are now happily voting again and again, again and again, again and again.
The last 100 years have been incredibly discouraging for the country. Since 1910, the country has dropped from 80% of the United States gross domestic product per capita to just 30%. Now, if you look at the past centuries, one thing becomes clear. The country had terrible government policies. Military leaders didn't care about the economy at all because they were too busy holding on to power. In the 20th century, Argentina was ruled by more generals than civilians, and their unconstitutional coups led to massive political instability. Obviously, this made the country a bad place for investment and doing business because there was neither law nor order. However, the politicians were no better. Many populist leaders, beginning with Perón, favored centralized economic planning and market interference. They subsidized things like food and energy, set price controls on markets, and launched costly social support programs. All of this was financed by printing government debt through the central bank. A surprising fact, Argentina has had a fiscal deficit for the past 123 years. For 113 years, each new leader vowed to fix the economic issues left by their predecessor.
But they
Used short-term tools, such as printing money and government debt. This led to periods of hyperinflation and a total of 9 government defaults. As you can see on this gross domestic product growth chart, this also caused huge booms and busts in Argentina's economy. Every 2 to 4 years, the country went from nearly double-digit growth to deep recessions. These extreme cycles killed businesses in Argentina and destroyed economic opportunities.
finally, Argentina got lucky. Perhaps it was like winning the lottery, or people simply grew weary of living in such dire circumstances. Although I think it was by chance. The common people don't understand the connection between politics and economics, and they vote for the tone of voice or for the shape below the waist. But this time they got lucky.
More government intervention means less economic growth, innovation, and productivity. Things like excessive regulation, too much bureaucracy, and government redistribution of resources make the economy less
Efficient. No one
understands these issues better than Javier Milei. He has written about a dozen books on Argentina's failed economy. He has given countless interviews and appeared on television, and eventually ran as a candidate in the 2023 presidential election. To solve this very problem, he had to compete with politicians from the left-wing establishment, but surprisingly, he won. He called the state a cancer and said, "The state is the enemy." He also claimed that inflation is theft from the people at a time when inflation was once again at its peak. On air, he stated that government bureaucrats are rats and parasites, and he called socialist politicians either ignorant or evil. In addition to blaming Argentina's issues on the left, Milei proposed a radical free market solution. Constantly appearing on television, Milei wrote several books, such as The Libertarian's Path and The End of Inflation. But most importantly, Milei presented a plan to save Argentina from the crisis it was in. His policy proposals come down to two things: less government and more freedom. Although he is not the first libertarian in Argentine politics, he is certainly the most radical of them all. He has said things like, "The state is the main enemy of society," and "the state is a criminal organization that lives by theft." In his ideal world, the government should be a so-called night watchman state. Its only functions should be the protection of individual rights, national defense, fighting crime, and maintaining foreign relations. All other functions of the state, such as education, healthcare, or social welfare, according to this ideology, should be privatized or abolished. This is part of the so-called chainsaw policy of cutting off all branches of power that are not absolutely necessary. Milei backed this idea by wielding a chainsaw at rallies, appearing quite unhinged. And most importantly, reducing the size of the government would allow Argentina to decrease government spending. Milei's predecessors spent about 40% of the gross domestic product per year through the government, and most of that money went to social programs and subsidies, such as for energy. Milei aims to reduce this figure to 25% by removing all of this.
With 40% of the country's budget, Milei reduced government spending by 25%. This is a huge, titanic, almost impossible reduction in spending. Difficult, almost impossible, but not impossible. The laws of nature and human nature are unchangeable. Everything else can be changed.
But such an approach is a double-edged sword. It allows Argentina to reduce taxes and eliminate the root cause of inflation, leading to economic growth and prosperity. Moreover, most people agree that the free market is more efficient than the government, and less government intervention gives companies more freedom. But cutting government support can negatively affect people from the lower and middle classes, as the government reduces socialist programs and subsidies. This will also affect government employees who may be laid off or have their salaries reduced. Overall, the reduction of government spending is part of Milei's so-called shock therapy. In the short term, this will lead to upheaval, but according to Milei, in the long term, it will bring greater prosperity. After all, if business thrives, there will be more high-paying jobs and overall prosperity will increase. Milei also wants to abolish Argentina's central bank, calling it a scam. To be fair, he's not the only one who criticizes the Central Bank of Argentina, since it is closely tied to the Argentine government. The central bank enabled money printing, leading to hyperinflation and the country's ruin. However, most economists favor having an independent central bank over not having one. According to modern economic theory, central banks play a key role in stabilizing the economy. This is achieved through the monopoly on printing money and setting interest rates. Simply put, the central bank literally creates money out of thin air and decides what interest rates should be paid on that money.
That is, central banks, Federal Reserves, like in the United States, are the exact opposite of a free market. Sometimes they can be a positive factor for a short period, but they are always destructive for the long-term economy.
Although abolishing the central bank is quite a radical measure, Javier Milei, that's not even your most radical idea. He also believes that the Argentine economy needs to be dollarized. He wants to recognize the dollar and other world currencies as legal tender. This is different from the plan to peg the peso to the dollar, a measure that has already been tried before and which, according to most economists, failed spectacularly. Milei stated that we are going to allow currencies to compete. He also added, at some point there will be so many dollars in the economy that maybe, on that day, we will be able to close the central bank. And if on that day I am still in power, don't doubt it, I will close it. That's because the central bank only controls the peso and has no power. In a dollar-dominated economy, Argentina wouldn't be Latin America's first nation to adopt the United States currency, as Ecuador, El Salvador, and Panama have already done so. Overall, the United States dollar has made these countries more stable.
Pay with whatever you want. Today, any bank can quickly convert from any currency to any other currency, but then the power of the central bank will be reduced to almost nothing and will no longer interfere with the free market. Milei and I apologize, agree not only on this. Like Milei, I wrote books saying that the leftists are either idiots or scoundrels. There is practically no third option except for being both an idiot and a scoundrel. The state, I wrote in the introduction to my book Capitalism 101, is the enemy of the citizen, the oppressor, the enemy of any progress. Whatever the government does, the result is always the opposite of the intended goal. Counting my books, Rudy Giuliani, Michelle Bachmann, Sarah Palin, and many other liberals in the classical sense of the word, that is, politicians with a libertarian mindset today, agreed with me. By the way, there will be a link to this book below, and you can get it for $0.00. That's a serious price. I understand. Think about it. Discuss it with your family. Simply because I want you to receive daily stories for free. About how to transform the world inside your system, inside our system, and inside your family, by the way. And how to simultaneously build your present where your family's life will be better, richer, and safer. So below there's a free subscription to the book and the video project. And as I already said, daily 10-minute stories, tales, and narratives. And Vermeulen not only set the foundation, but he also went into politics, won, and is now cutting the branch that the leftists, socialists, fascists, and collectivists are sitting on.
He is very critical of the left. He is very critical of the left, so many people call him an extreme right-wing politician. Milei believes that if you hold leftist views, you are a terrible person. He also believes that socialism is a deadly system that brings only suffering. Saying such things about communism is usually considered acceptable, but saying it about socialism is quite radical. In agreement with other right-wing movements, Milei also claimed that climate change is a socialist lie, and gender ideology is cultural Marxism. Alright, these statements drew a lot of criticism from the media and Milei's opponents, and he was nicknamed El Loco, or the Madman. But Milei's hatred of the government and the center-left elite was incredibly popular in Argentina. After all, just imagine what it's like to live in a country that has been in decline for decades. Many lower and middle-class Argentinians don't care what the media or left-wing politicians say. They simply want change. Now, a year after taking office as president, we can finally assess how Milei has performed. From a political point of view, opinions about his actions obviously differ greatly.
So, unlike Trump, who has been in the White House for 6 months, Milei has been leading the government for a year already. So what has happened in the years since the country shifted from the tracks of socialism to the free flight of the free market?
Argentina's president shares many similarities with United States President Donald Trump beyond just economic issues. He withdrew from the World Health Organization, wants to fight illegal immigration, and is pushing for stricter law and order. He also abolished several ministries, including the Ministry of Women, Gender, and Diversity. He also started a war against wokeism, which he says is a cancer that must be eradicated. Milei's controversial and polarizing measures have divided society, with some adoring him and others hating him. Despite this, a year into his term, Milei's approval ratings surpassed that of his two predecessors. Argentina is achieving incredible economic success, despite reduced government spending, contrary to most expectations. Fixing the economy was Milei's key promise, which he kept. Milei declared, "We are already providing a remarkable government. In fact, this is the best government in the history of Argentina." Economic indicators show the truth, but you can choose to believe it or not. Argentina has emerged from a 2-year recession that began in 2023, and the country's future looks promising. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development predicts gross domestic product growth of 5.2% in 2025 and 4.3% in 2026. This economic recovery happened much faster than expected, and, most importantly, it occurred while Milei cut the government budget by about 31%. This event, exceeding 10% of gross domestic product, is unprecedented in Argentina's history. As a result, the country recorded its first budget surplus in 14 years and can now start paying off some of its debts and becoming more financially responsible. That's a huge difference compared to the previous administration.
That means the government spent less than it received and started paying off its debts. So we're waiting for about the 3rd year of Trump, but why did it happen there in 6 months, and for us it's in the 3rd year? Because first we had to put huge amounts of money into the military, and second, huge amounts into the border, stopping at the border, and even more so, gathering, so to speak, those who have already crossed over, and deporting millions of illegals from our country.
Which in 2023 amounted to a deficit of 4.4% of gross domestic product. Economists are surprised because, according to modern economic theory, the government needs to increase spending to get out of a recession. A sharp reduction in spending can actually harm the economy and trigger a new recession. However, shock therapy largely worked because the private sector expanded so quickly that it offset the reduction in government spending. Meanwhile, Milei's approval rating remains high. It's one of the highest in the world. In an interview, Milei said, "I have an approval rating of 50%, after implementing the largest austerity program in our history." That's a miracle, isn't it? Besides, the inflation rate has dropped significantly. When Milei took office, Argentina was facing hyperinflation, with an annual rate exceeding 200%. Inflation is currently at a 5-year low due to Milei's decision to stop printing money.
Naturally, the leftists are furious. Their source of income was taken away. Their policies, their economy were killing Argentina. But now those policies have been canceled and people are getting better. People are starting to realize that the road to hell was paved with the socialists' good intentions. But the truth is, people are foolish and will immediately believe the next smooth talker who promises them money growing on bushes. But at the moment, well, I would say this. The citizens of Argentina seem to be happy that it turns out that it's possible to organize a normal life in their country as well.
At the very beginning of his term, Milei abolished 13 government agencies and 30,000 federal employees lost their jobs, which is about 10% of the federal workforce. Milei claimed he dismissed 50,000 people. The government also stopped renewing contracts. As a result, the unemployment rate initially rose by 1%. The remaining public employees faced a devaluation of their salaries due to inflation and a freeze on pay raises. Milei's idea is that cutting government spending and lowering taxes can stimulate economic growth, and the people who were laid off will be able to find jobs in the growing private sector. However, many find it difficult to adapt, particularly poor people in Argentina who have been hit hard.
The problem is that bureaucrats are used to doing nothing. They can't adapt, and they hate the new government for their problems. 42% of Argentina's population lived, that is, before Milei, and just a year ago in Argentina, in a state of poverty. They were delivered and handed out food, medicine, and of course drugs, if they said they couldn't live without them. If anyone wants to see how it's done, come to us in Los Angeles. We'll be happy to show you, as they say. During the reform, another 3 million people joined this category, ladies and gentlemen, and poverty reached 53% of the population.
This was the primary critique of the Milei government. He reduced subsidies and cut funding for social services. The poverty rate was already terrible. When he came to power, it was 42%. In the first half of 2024, this figure rose to 53%, which led to 3 to 4 million people falling into poverty. Many experts and journalists condemned the Argentine president for this.
But that was 6 months ago. The reforms billion started to bear fruit. They started to work. The private sector began to create jobs, and the unemployed went there.
Claiming that he is betraying the poor. For some time, there were also violent protests in Buenos Aires against the government's economic decisions, but now the situation is calming down. Private estimates show that the poverty rate fell to 37% in the latter half of 2024, lower than when Milei took office. And that would mean that more than 7 million people have escaped poverty in 6 months. There are several reasons for this.
7 million people have risen out of poverty. The officials who weren't fired started working much better, realizing that they could be dismissed. Also, like here, theft has decreased.
In his New Year's address, the president also stated that his administration is providing social support much more effectively. Under previous administrations, there was a lot of government waste, and cutting expenses doesn't always lead to less support for the poor. However, Milei's economic program was not only about cutting government spending, it was also aimed at increasing economic freedom by reducing bureaucratic barriers. The president stated that his administration had repealed more than 900 regulations, which is about 3 per day. This turned out to be very successful in the rental market. The government stopped interfering. As a result, rent decreased by 40% in real terms, and the supply of rental housing in Buenos Aires increased by as much as 300%. This is just one example of how less government regulation can lead to greater economic prosperity.
Do you understand what happened? They abolished rent control, and they also removed government inspection and oversight of rental housing. More. People stopped worrying that it would be impossible to evict someone who doesn't pay, and they started renting out their apartments. So more apartments started being rented out, and the rental market became competitive again, and prices dropped by 40%. Regarding taxes, Milei plans to do the same thing that Trump started, namely to reduce taxes, gradually easing the tax burden on the citizens of Argentina.
The president aims to be fiscally prudent, and it's difficult to lower taxes while also eliminating the government deficit, but Milei has promised to start reducing taxes this year, which will help consumers and the private sector. Ultimately, he wants to completely reform the tax system to make it much less complicated. He wants to leave no more than 6 types of taxes, eliminating 90% of the existing taxes. This will greatly simplify doing business in Argentina, cutting bureaucracy. These ideas are quite radical. Milei has yet to fulfill all his promises, such as abolishing the central bank and dollarizing the economy. The reason is that this would destabilize the economy so much that Milei would lose support and would probably be removed from office. Cutting government spending has already been a big step that brought pain and hardship. Nevertheless, some anarcho-capitalists were disappointed with Milei because they wanted him to go to Abang right after taking office. The president's response was, "We are all liberal libertarians. We are not liberal fools." But he did not abandon his plans. A lot will still change in the next few years. This could lead to even greater economic success. But the president's policies could also fail if they become even more radical. According to Milei himself, the difference between a madman and a genius is success. This man could go down in history as El Loca, or as the man who saved Argentina from its long decline.
They say there's only one step from genius to madness. If the changes had happened more slowly, the leftists would have managed to kick Milei out of the presidential palace. But they happened in time, and he is Argentina's hero today. Milei has once again proven that when an individual is given freedom along with the responsibility for their own fate, they work 100 times better than when they know they won't be allowed to fail. Then most of us relax, take it easy, don't worry, and together with the whole society, sink into the mire. Milei and Trump understand that only a system that matches human nature, only a system where human qualities don't need to be changed, only such a system brings society a normal, secure, and protected life. As we remember, a number of countries don't allow American goods in using tariff barriers, simply restricting them, or making up all sorts of parameters by which Americans can't bring in or import their goods into these countries. Everyone does this, from Japan and South Korea to Canada and the European Union. The deadline that Trump gave for negotiations has passed, and in accordance with his warning, Trump informed several countries that since he didn't receive realistic proposals from them, he has unilaterally increased their tariffs. If they respond in kind, then Trump, for his part, is ready to raise tariffs on any goods sky high.
Donald Trump is once again fueling a global trade war with this move. This is really very important. I mean, this week he sent out almost 24 such letters to other countries, signaling his intention to impose staggering tariffs on them starting August 1st. Now he is targeting some of America's largest trading partners, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and Mexico. Yesterday it was Canada. They will get a 35% tariff. Donald Trump says he is seeking a level playing field in trade, and he posted on his social network justifying this action against the European Union. I'll read you a short excerpt. Please understand that these tariffs are necessary to correct years of tariff and non-tariff policies and trade barriers, which have led to large and unsustainable trade deficits. With regard to the United States.
So why did Europe, Mexico, and Canada raise an outcry about a trade war? For decades, they didn't allow our goods to be imported. When we demanded that they lift the restrictions, and said that if they didn't, we would impose restrictions on their goods. Suddenly, it turned out that this is what they call Trump's act of war against the whole world. But Trump doesn't just want equal opportunities. He also believes that things can't go on like this because it threatens our well-being and our security.
This deficit poses a serious threat to our economy and, essentially, to our national security. The European Union tried to outline a sort of preliminary trade agreement with him, an agreement in principle that could serve as a basis for more detailed negotiations in the future. That is, Mexico and Canada were also negotiating with him. And you know what? It seems that Donald Trump is simply not interested. Earlier earlier this week at a televised cabinet meeting. He said, look, a letter means a deal. A letter means a deal. And he continued, we have 200 countries. We can't meet with 200 countries. It's too time-consuming. It's too complicated. So I think the question for the European Union and others is what should they do? How should they respond? Should they even respond at all? The European Union has already prepared. They already have a kind of response package. This package is sort of ready and waiting for its time. Its value is approximately 21 billion euros. But they would prefer not to use it. And I think this was reflected in today's reaction of Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen. I'll quote a little from this now. She said that introducing 30% tariffs on exports from the European Union would disrupt the most important transatlantic supply chains, which would harm businesses, consumers, and patients on both sides of the Atlantic. We are still ready to continue working on the agreement until August 1st. Meanwhile, we will take all necessary actions to safeguard European Union interests, including adopting proportionate retaliatory steps, and if necessary, period. The key point here is at the end. They don't want to resort to this unless it's necessary. And I think it would be a mistake to claim that all Europeans share the same position on this issue. The Germans will want to try to protect their industrial base. And the German Minister of Economy said today, we need to quickly agree on a pragmatic solution. They don't want a trade war with the Americans.
The problem for Europe is that the different countries in their union have different interests, and how they will bring them together is completely unclear right now. I would say, Trump, there are 200 countries will find partners. And by the way, for those who aren't in a hurry, there's a surprise. They won't pay the 10% base tax like those who rushed, maybe 15, maybe even 20%. Trump acts like he's kind of unbalanced, a little crazy, absolutely unpredictable, someone who could, since he's unpredictable, ruin any country's economy without batting an eye.
Then the president also said yesterday that that the new base rate will be 15 or 20%. Here's the quote he gave. We'll just say that all the remaining countries will pay, whether it's 20% or 15%, we'll decide that now. If you read into this, the base rate is currently 10%, right? The general tariff for everyone is 10%. So what will this mean and what will it lead to? How will it affect the trade war? If now you could say everyone around the world and the markets were ready and already used to the base rate of 10%. So what does this change then?
And I think part of this question takes us back to the beginning, namely just in the last 24 hours. In the last few days, you've seen tariff rates change quite sharply. And if you look at where we are now compared to January, we've seen more than 60 different tariff announcements. So in fact, tariff rates have been going up and down.
That's how it felt. But when you hear a specific number, it's impressive.
And it turns out that we're in a situation where it's not just about the impact on consumers, but also about the impact on businesses that are trying to make investment decisions. How can they even understand where all this will lead?
Business claims we are paralyzed.
And that makes sense, right? Because is it worth moving production to the United States if, say, in a couple of months or even weeks, tariffs are introduced on these countries and the tariff rates turn out to be lower? Is it even worth investing, if we're really talking about China, is it worth investing in production in Vietnam or India? Because these are the countries with which we essentially have more allied relations in terms of trade partners. What if this is all just about boosting profits? If we're talking about the fact that last week we had a huge tax and spending bill that increased the deficit, and now we need to find revenue to make up for it. These tariff rates are high and will continue to rise.
But then you could add that right now there's a clear example that this isn't related to economic policy or revenue collection. If we're talking about Brazil, that's right. So we have the threat of imposing a tariff against Brazil, and the president is openly saying that he's using this tariff to help a political ally without mentioning anything about economic policy. And here's the trade surplus with Brazil.
And this That's why, as an economist, I was somewhat disappointed by how this administration is fixated on trade deficits. Because I have a trade deficit with them, and that's a good thing, since I can go there and buy food. But if you really believe that trade deficits are some kind of central problem, then imposing a 50% tariff on a country with which we've had a trade surplus for the past 15 years doesn't quite fit that logic.
I listen to all these expert opinions and I think they're really stupid, aren't they? Don't they understand what Trump is telling all the manufacturers? Guys, make everything here. With us here, we're inside here. We cut taxes, we improve the situation for those who build and manufacture here. We remove restrictions, we help get licenses, we make the situation predictable and good. And for those who want to manufacture there, bring it here and sell to us to take money out of our country. Well, thank you very much, but we make this situation unpredictable so that it would be convenient and desirable to manufacture here, and inconvenient and undesirable to import. Yes, we produced it there for a lower cost. Okay, but then we have to transport it, which is also not very cheap. Okay, but then there's the border, where, as they say, we'll stick it to you. And also, let's say if these are cars, then people who bought a car that's 70% made in the United States of America get a tax deduction, a deduction from their income. To be more precise, as someone already pointed out to me somewhere, I just automatically translate from English. So, gentlemen, everything is very simple. Come to us, invest here, employ our workers, use our resources, use everything we have. If you want, take it from here and ship it anywhere you like. We will help you a lot in this regard. And if you want to do it differently, then let someone else help you. And we will put a few small sticks in the wheels from time to time. Well, so why 15 or 20? It just means what it means. That's because you decided you could handle 10%, but who told you it would always be 10%? Maybe it'll be 15, maybe 20. Or maybe tomorrow I'll just say 197.75%. Well, how would you like that? So don't even think about it. Invest here, not somewhere else. I'm so sick of these experts talking about the service station. I've come to the conclusion that they lack intelligence. And all they have are some data stored in the gray matter of their brains, processed by someone else. Then they read it somewhere, or learned it, or someone told them, and they neatly stored it there. And now all they can do is dig into their storage and pull out that information, but they can't manage to think. I think that's because since childhood, neither American nor European schools teach you how to think. They teach you how to jump, either up or long. 2 add 2 plus 2. Here are 2 boxes and 2 boxes, 2 apples and 2 apples, that's what they teach. But thinking also needs to be taught. It's a complicated process, They don't teach him about the Lord. I don't know how the negotiations with the socialists of Canada or with the socialists of the European Union will end. I don't know what will happen on August 1st, before or after, or if, so to speak, something else will move to September 2nd again. I only know one thing. Investors are rushing to America, young and old alike. And that's exactly what we want. Well, that's all. Thanks for listening. Until next time. Subtitles created by